I'm Ben from the business development team here at Remilk, and we'll talk a bit about precision fermentation in dairy, starting with real dairy and no cows. That is what we do here at Remilk. Before I get into how we do what we do, I want to dive deeper into why we do what we do, and starting with the climate crisis that Adivi spoke about, looking at the issues in our unsustainable food systems. It's about 30% of emissions are coming from our unsustainable food systems, and about half of that comes from the animal-derived proteins that we consume. And of course, we have issues of land, water usage, emissions, waste, and I want to dive a bit deeper into the first three of land, water, and emissions. So if we start by looking at the land, the Earth's surface is about 70% water, leaving us with only about 30% land. Of the land surface, we have 70% being habitable, around 30% being barren land, and about 1% that we've saved for ourselves. Of the habitable land, about 50% is used for agriculture. The other half is forests and shrubs, which is also shrinking. And of the agricultural land, nearly 80% is used for animal livestock, converting to only under 20% of the global calorie supply. Which is an extremely inefficient use of land. I want to go back to the habitable land for a second. Viv spoke about this as well, but 50% is used for agricultural purposes. This is actually the number that got Remilk to exist. Aviv, our co-founder and CEO, saw this number along with the fact that in the next few decades, we'll be doubling our food consumption. If you do some simple math, 50% and 50% equals 100%. Where are we going to continue to produce our food? So we need to find more sustainable ways to produce what we eat. If we look at the usage of water, it takes nearly 1,000 liters of water to produce 1 liter of cow's milk. If we look at the composition of cow's milk, nearly 80% is water, making that an extremely inefficient use of water. And if we look at emissions, if cows were a country, they'd be the second largest emitter of CO2 in the world. It's after China and just before the US. These are numbers from 2016, and they're only getting worse. If we talk about the animal food market and consumer preferences, we see that this is US data, but we see this happening worldwide, where a lot of the world's population is moving towards what we call the flexitarian, or reducing their animal protein intake. And this could be for various reasons. It could be for the animal rights and animal cruelty. It could be for health concerns and the antibiotics and hormones that come into the animal products that we eat, as well as environmental reasons. When talking about the size of the dairy market, it's nearly $1 trillion industry. And with our current technology, we can speak to around a third of it. All right, now we'll get into how we do what we do. And I think this is the most interesting part. So we produce our dairy proteins through the process of precision fermentation. Precision fermentation is a technology that's been around for decades, and it's very similar to that of the beer fermentation. I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with the process, but I'll go over it high level just to make sure we're on the same page. So you start with a single-celled yeast organism, and you put that cell into a stainless steel tank. You put in water, a carbon source or sugars, minerals, and optimal conditions for it to grow. And once it grows, it consumes that carbon source, turning them into ethanol and CO2, or alcohol and bubbles, giving us the beer that we all know and love. Now, in the precision fermentation process, we start at the same starting point. We have that single-celled yeast organism, but instead of having it produce beer, we train it to produce dairy proteins. How do we do that? We go into the organism and we take out the DNA strand that is responsible for producing beer, and we insert the DNA strand that is responsible for producing dairy proteins. This is the DNA strand that comes from a cow, not from an actual cow. This is actually taken from an online source of code and inserted into the cell. And once it has that code, it now has a new instruction manual. And instead of producing beer, we'll produce whatever we ask it to produce, in this case, dairy proteins, and then we go through the same process, take that single-celled organism, put it in a stainless steel tank, add water, carbon source, optimal conditions to thrive, and the yeast multiply, consuming that carbon source and converting them into dairy proteins. Now, where we differ a bit from the beer fermentation is that in the beer fermentation, you want the whole liquid alcoholic mix. In our fermentation, you only want to isolate those dairy proteins. So you go through a process of isolation and filtration until you're left with a very fine white powder that can then be formulated into whatever dairy products food companies know how to make today. That could be cream cheese, ice cream, yogurt, and the likes. And you're left with a product that is the same, but better. So it's the same in its experience and its texture, its mouthfeel, but better in multiple ways. And we'll start with how it's better than traditional dairy. So we'll start with the fact that it is 100% animal-free. We never touch a cow in our entire process. Going to the health benefits, we're looking at cow's milk that has lactose, which about 70% of the world's population has some sort of intolerance to, cholesterol, growth hormones and antibiotics, which find their way into our final products that we eat, and we don't want that. If we look at the environmental impact, so that we use a fraction of the environmental resources needed to produce cow's milk in the traditional manner. And if we look at how Remilk compares to plant-based products, in plant-based products, you have protein that comes from plants, which tastes like plants. Now, I'm not saying that these products are necessarily bad, but if you want a creamy cream cheese to taste like traditional cream cheese, it shouldn't taste like soy or pea. So because we're using bioidentical proteins, our products taste just like that of the traditional animal counterpart. If we look at the nutritional facts, you see that Remilk is using the same protein inclusion rates that you have in other traditional products, whereas plant-based proteins typically, because they have plenty, not so tasty off flavors, plant-based companies will typically use less protein and more starches to fill their products. And if we look at the functionality, proteins are what give food their functionality. Dairy proteins are what make products spread and froth and cream and stretch. And you don't get that with the plant-based proteins, and you do get it with the dairy proteins. The model that we work with is a B2B ingredients model. So we provide dairy ingredients to companies who then formulate them into co-branded products, just like our product that we released earlier this month, I guess it was actually now last month, with Bold Culture. So it's General Mills is using our protein to create a precision fermentation cream cheese, which is then sold to end consumers. And a bit about Remilk on our path and where we come from and where we're going. So we were founded in 2019, and in a very short period of time, we're able to raise $150 million and reach a commercial scale of production. Adivi spoke about the difficulty of scaling up these technologies, and we've been able to do that. We're today about 100 employees and have commercial agreements with some of the largest food companies around the world. There's two that I can speak of, which are the General Mills and Tara, which is the second leading dairy company in Israel. And hopefully you'll be seeing more Remilk products on the shelves in the near future. So at the end, we have the next generation of dairy, which is producing the same product just in a different manner. It's sustainable, nutritious, kind, and reliable. We've also spoken about the need for food safety and food security. We're able to provide a input 24/7 all year long at the same cost or maybe even lower than traditional dairy. We're seeing, especially in the last few years, dairy prices fluctuating up and down depending on the price of feedstock or droughts. It could be diseases, wars around the world. When you're working with precision fermentation, you don't have that. You can have a reliable source of protein coming year round, and dairy companies especially are excited about this. Thank you.